This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/MapperForward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome back to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. We are joined by Matt McCormack for our 4th out of 5 episode series. So Matt, talk to us about what we're going to talk about today, which is like defending against these attacks and how we can best prepare ourselves. In the last episode, we spoke about antiviruses. What else can we do?
Yeah, so I think there's really you could, coming back to threat models again, thinking about as a small to medium business or as a sole trader, what are the most important stuff you can do to really defend against this stuff, right? Against the ransomware, and I think really ransomware is key here because it really shows it's a really good example of someone interrupting your business, right, and blocking business continuity, and that's really what we're one of the things we're trying to avoid, right, by getting hacked. It's not and also the headache, right, and we'll talk about the headache later, but I think there's a few things, right. So it is the password reuse stuff, right? We talked about that, making sure that you're not reusing passwords across places, using a password manager or something so that you don't fall into the habit of just use that same password again, because the overlap between people using weak passwords for their own stuff and then using those same weak passwords at your work or using their work email address for websites and then using that same weak password, the website gets hacked. Now people have a way into your business. So passwords, important. Antivirus you talked about, it's really like cheap and easy. It's worth having. Business email compromise we talked about. It's the social engineering side. So having processes in place so that when an invoice needs to get paid or money needs to get transferred, that there is a verification in place, that it's not being done by one person who, if they get tricked, then you've lost a whole bunch of money, right? There needs to be some kind of verification. If you're a small to medium business, maybe that means anything over X amount of dollars has to verify with
a phone call
an extra person, a phone call or something to the person. Someone else has eyes on it, and it forces people to stop, think, look at it, scrutinize with someone else. Is this legit? Who is this person? Do you know anything about this? And before you pay money, right, or before you put in the company credit card details.
And can I just mention something there? As a business consultant in the coffee industry, people, please hear me when I say, if a customer hasn't proven their ability to earn credit from your business, they have to pay up front. We see this again and again and again as a type of fraud where people will fake a credit history through references and whatnot, and they'll come to you and they'll say, well, can I set up an account for $50,000 a month? And you think that because their brand is recognizable, you'll turn around and say, well, sure, we'll give you 30-day terms off the bat. No. What you need to be doing is saying, we give you 30-day terms after we can see that you've paid on time every time for 6 months. Yep. That's another way of protecting yourself from this kind of fraud. So I just wanted to make sure we mention that.
Yeah, and you could imagine as well, right? I mean, this kind of let's say the company you're dealing with is the one who gets hacked, not you, right? And they lose a whole bunch of money. They'll be able to pay invoices for a while, right? Their business continuity is screwed in the short term and potentially forever, right? Businesses might
there's a cascading effect there.
Yeah, absolutely, cascading effect. Yeah, if they have to shut down or if they're impacted because they've been lax on their security and they had someone from Nigeria trick them into transferring $100,000 somehow, then they haven't got that capital there to be able to pay you and any other kind of, if you're a smaller vendor, you're probably going to be at the bottom of the list because they might not think that you have the legal power behind you to come after them, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. So we talked about business email compromise or social engineering. So processes in place is really the way to deal with that. As an individual, though, having your process in place, if you can assume that like your banks, your online retailers, these kind of people are not going to be SMSing you or emailing you or calling you up demanding money or asking you for your two-factor code or anything like that, right? They shouldn't. if it's never happened before, if it seems weird, probably is weird. Um, and then we talked about, so then ransomware I think is really the important thing to try to defend against as a business, not just because it's very prolific, but as we mentioned, the way that you protect against that is backups and having set and forget backups, right? So using a cloud provider or something else where it's automatically backed up. There's never a single copy, like a single point of failure for your sensitive business critical information, because then by setting that up to defend against ransomware, you're also setting up your disaster recovery, and it's
right.
And it ensures business continuity, right? If you get hacked, if your building catches on fire and you run out and all the laptops go up, that's not great. But while you're dealing with insurance, you just get
you can set your business back up,
and you back up. You back up in 2 hours.
Right. A question on that, Matt. What happens if the person who's hacked you and is carrying out the ransom on your business? What happens if they turn around and escalate the threat and say that they're going to release the information to the public?
And it's totally viable, right? Depending on what they've got their hands on. It's, if I'm the bad person, this is my business. My business is stealing intellectual property and holding it to ransom. I'm going to try whatever angle I can.
Yeah. If you're not going to pay me, right? I'll find somebody else that will.
Yeah, that's right. So I can give your competitor this is particularly juicy information. For example, I mean, I'm not an expert in the ins and outs of the coffee industry, but in some industries, intellectual property. Yeah,
client lists, suppliers, the pricing that this is a really sensitive one, which is what price, especially as the supply chain becomes much more competitive because the yield of coffee is dropping. And so people want to know, what price are you paying from this particular green supplier? And is it the same price that I'm paying? That kind of competitive pricing is very valuable between larger companies.
Yeah, I mean, and this, you can imagine that they would, threaten to tell your company list that you've been hacked and that their information is now compromised. There's right. And then you've just lost a bunch of customers. Or the suppliers, they could then use they could use you to try and rip off the suppliers. Like there's a whole bunch of flow-on effects here, right? And we'll talk more about the flow-on effects, but just making ransomware not a thing, not something you have to worry about, helps your business in a lot of ways because you've already set up, you've kind of set up your defenses and your business continuity, and that's really what it's about. And we talked, and I think about things like your website, let's say you use your online shopping site and all that kind of stuff, making sure that stuff is well secured, not using the same password for that you are something else. Making sure that people can't hold it to ransom as well is really is another area I think is worth at least mentioning. And then look, if you're a larger company, if you're beyond the small to medium business and you are making a lot of money and you probably should be paying someone at least on a consultant basis to help secure your business, because it's there's a lot to it, obviously. And the larger you are, the more attack space or like attack surface you have, right? The larger you're, the more severe your threat model becomes.
Is it safe to assume that companies like Square and Revel and the delivery app systems that all have feeders into our businesses, is it safe to assume that they have their shit together when it comes to cybersecurity?
They're kind of required to, especially nowadays. If you're a payment provider or something like that, there are pretty stringent restrictions around that stuff. And you would know about it by now if they didn't. Okay. They employ a lot of people and they pay them a lot of money to secure their internal systems and do things like ensure that the cryptography on the endpoint on those devices that everyone has is secure, and the fundamental, they make it very hard for bad guys get to them, right? And they would have I know people who work at some of those companies doing security, and they're really good at what they do. So and they get paid really well to do it. So I think it is safe to say the larger the company, if they're still around and they haven't been in the headlines and all that kind of stuff, then the chances are that they are, I would say, at least doing what they should be.
Okay.
And we talked about social engineering before. When you think about a payment provider like Square or anyone, right? Bad guys aren't going to go. They're not going to go after they're going to go after the easiest way in that they can, right? So it's not. So trying to somehow come up with some elaborate scheme to compromise Square would be very difficult.
Yep.
Not impossible, but very difficult. Whereas sending an email to someone to get them to trick them into paying an invoice, much easier, right? So I think it's feasible, possible, but not probable, I guess is how I would put it. Yeah.
So that we both lived in the US, and we were there when local governments, city halls were getting held to ransom. Mm-hmm. That's sounds like a much more approachable endeavor for a cyber criminal than, say, Square or something like that.
Yeah, if you can get a few of those, then you get a few $1,000s or $1 million or whatever. I mean, local governments were getting smashed in the US when we were living there. I was working for a different security company at the time, and having to help them out. We would be dealing with that in various states, right?
Hospitals,
they were underfunded, hospitals, all that stuff, right? That's I know people who worked on. So, we had the hospitals in Australia got done as well, and people who worked on that stuff. It's especially with we talked about before with WannaCry, it was kind of spreading indiscriminately, right? So it was any business that didn't have their stuff together was getting done. Or people for that matter. Mm-hmm. So if you're a larger company, I think the message is you're a kind of large target, whether you want to be or not, and whether you think you are or not. In reality, doesn't particularly care what you think or what I think. It is what it is. So I would advise it. At least have a consultant or someone. Talk
and you mentioned the flow-on effects.
Yeah, so I think. If we want to get into what happens if you do get hacked.
Then let's talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. We'll be back for our last episode to talk about what will happen if you do get hacked, and how you can take action in that time. We'll be back shortly. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.